In the winter of 1901, the Chicago Telegraph office was the beating heart of American commerce. It was a cacophony of rhythmic clicking, the language of the future. At the center of this world sat Charles Cowman. He was a master of the wire, a man whose fingers moved with a precision that commanded a massive salary. He had the house, the status, and the great American dream before the term had even been coined. But there is a specific kind of silence that can be heard even in a room full of noise. It is the silence of a man who realizes he is successful at the wrong thing. Charles Cowman didn't just quit his job. He executed what his colleagues called a professional suicide. He walked away from the wealth of the Gilded Age to move to a country that didn't want him, to preach a message they hadn't asked for, and to begin a countdown toward a physical collapse that would eventually claim his life. This is not a story about a man who lived happily ever after. It is a story about the crushing of the olive. It is the account of how one man's absolute exhaustion created a stream of life that still flows through the deserts of the broken-hearted today. To understand the intensity of Charles Cowman, you have to understand the telegraph. In the late 1800s, being a high-speed telegraph operator was the equivalent of being a high-frequency trader on Wall Street today. It required nerves of steel and an obsessed mind. Charles was the best. He was a man of systems, speed, and efficiency. But then came the call. It wasn't a whisper. For a man like Cowman, it was a command. He looked at the maps of the East, Japan, Korea, China, and saw millions of souls living and dying without ever hearing the name of Jesus. To his systematic mind, this wasn't just a spiritual tragedy, it was a logistical failure. When he told his wife, Letty, that they were leaving, people thought he was unstable. You don't leave the heights of Chicago society for the slums of Tokyo unless you've lost your mind or found your soul. In 1901, the Cowmans boarded a ship with no guaranteed salary, no denominational backing, and a mad ambition. They arrived in Japan with nothing but a telegrapher's work ethic. Charles didn't want to just build a church. He wanted to build a movement. He founded the Oriental Missionary Society, and he applied the same rhythmic, relentless precision to missions that he had used in Chicago. Charles Cowman had a philosophy that would eventually be his undoing. I would rather burn out than rust out. He didn't believe in the slow, leisurely pace of traditional missions. He saw time as a dwindling currency. He launched what he called the Great Village Campaign. The goal was staggering, bordering on the impossible, to put a portion of the gospel into every single house in Japan. Think about the geography of Japan in the early 1900s. There were no high-speed rails. There were thousands of isolated mountain villages, reachable only by foot, through mud, snow, and grueling terrain. Cowman didn't care. He led teams of men who walked until their boots fell apart. They slept in sheds. They ate meager rations. Charles was at the front of the line. He wasn't a desk administrator. He was the lead scout. He was pushing his body 18 to 20 hours a day. He was living on adrenaline and divine obsession. He treated his body like a machine, a telegraph key that could be hammered indefinitely. But the human frame is not made of brass and wire. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It was a slow erosion. In the midst of the campaign, Charles began to feel a tightening in his chest. The man who had outpaced everyone else was suddenly gasping for air. The diagnosis was devastating. His heart was failing. The years of burning out had finally scorched the lamp. He was forced to leave the field he loved. He was carried onto a ship, a broken man, returning to America not as a conquering hero, but as an invalid. For the next 6 years, Charles Cowman lived in a room of silence. The man of action was now a man of the sickbed. The man who wanted to reach every house in Japan was now unable to walk to the front door of his own home. This is where most biographies would end in tragedy. We love the stories of the victors who die in the heat of battle. We struggle with the stories of the giants who are forced to sit in the dark and wait for death. Charles grappled with intense depression. He felt like a failure. He had left everything for Japan, and now he was a burden to his wife. He heard the accuser whispering in the silence. Was it worth it? Look at you now. You're useless. However, in God's economy, Nothing is wasted, especially not pain. As Charles lay dying, his wife Letty sat by his side, to comfort him and to keep her own soul from drowning in the desert of their circumstances. She began to collect snippets of encouragement. She gathered poems, scripture, and the writings of ancient mystics who had also known the dark night of the soul. She began to see that Charles's suffering was a different kind of mission. If his life in Japan was the planting, his suffering in the sick room was the crushing. When you crush an olive, you get oil. When you crush a grape, you get wine. When you crush a man like Charles Cowman, you get a depth of spiritual resonance that a healthy, successful man can never produce. Charles passed away in 1924. He died feeling that his best years were wasted in sickness. He was wrong. Letty took the notes she had gathered during those 6 years of agony and compiled them into a book. She titled it, Streams in the Desert. She didn't expect much, but she released it into a world that was reeling from the aftermath of World War I, a world full of widows, orphans, and broken men who were also living in a desert. The book exploded. It became one of the most successful devotionals in history. It was found in the pockets of soldiers in the trenches of World War II. It sat on the nightstands of grieving mothers for decades. It has been translated into dozens of languages, reaching far more people than Charles ever could have reached on foot in the mountains of Japan. There is a profound irony in the life of Charles Cowman. He spent his youth trying to speak to the world, through his effort, his speed, and his telegraphic precision. But the world only truly heard him when he became silent. His greatest legacy wasn't the number of miles he walked or the number of houses he visited. His greatest legacy was the stream that flowed from his broken heart. We live in a culture that worships productivity. We are told that our value is found in what we can build, how fast we can move, and how much impact we can generate. We are the spiritual descendants of the Chicago Telegraph office, obsessed with the clicking of the keys. Charles Cowman stands as a sentinel, challenging that entire narrative. He tells us that sometimes God will call you to build something great, and then He will allow it to be taken away. He will allow your health to fail, your doors to close, and your platform to vanish. Not because He is finished with you, but because He is preparing to do a work through you that your strength would only get in the way of. Here are lessons from the life of Charles Cowman, with direct, practical application, not abstract inspiration, but truth you can live with when the desert is real. 1. Success can still be a sign you're off course. Lesson. Cowman had wealth, respect, and mastery, and still felt the ache of misalignment. Application. Ask yourself honestly, am I fulfilled or just applauded? If the noise of success cannot silence the unease in your spirit, God may be calling you to obedience, not optimization. 2. God doesn't change your wiring, He redirects it. Lesson. Cowman's disciplined, systematic mind wasn't wasted when he left business for missions. Application. Don't despise your professional skills when God calls you elsewhere. Instead, ask, how can this same discipline serve eternal purposes? Your past training may be the very tool God intends to redeem. 3. Obedience often looks reckless before it looks right. Lesson. Leaving Chicago for Japan looked like madness. Application. If everyone understands your decision, it may not require faith. Obedience is rarely validated before the step is taken, only afterward. 4. Zeal is not a substitute for wisdom. Lesson. Burning out was not heroic. It was costly. Application. Examine your pace. Are you running because God is leading, or because stopping would force you to listen? Rest is not retreat. It is stewardship. 5. Your body is not a tool, it is a trust. Lesson. Cowman treated his body like a machine, and it broke. Application. Ignoring limits is not faith. Ask, am I honoring God with my strength, or consuming it without permission? Longevity often glorifies God more than intensity. 6. When God removes you from the field, He has not removed you from purpose. Lesson. Cowman's collapse felt like divine rejection. Application. If illness, burnout, or loss has sidelined you, resist the lie that your usefulness has ended. God may be changing the form of your calling, not canceling it. 7. Silence is a classroom, not a punishment. Lesson. 6 years of stillness shaped a deeper legacy than decades of activity. Application. If God has quieted your life, ask, what is He teaching me that noise prevented me from hearing? Silence trains discernment, humility, and dependence. 8. Pain can become ministry if you let God interpret it. Lesson. Cowman's suffering produced spiritual depth, not bitterness. Application. Do not rush to escape pain before God finishes speaking through it. Ask, what comfort might God be forming in me for others who will suffer later? 9. God often works through hidden faithfulness. Lesson. Letty's quiet gathering of encouragement changed generations. Application. If your role feels unseen, supporting, caring, waiting, do not despise it. God often entrusts history-shaping work to those who never stand on a platform. 10. What feels like wasted years may be the most productive ones. Lesson. Cowman believed his sickbed years were lost. Heaven disagreed. Application. Stop measuring seasons by output. Ask instead, who am I becoming here? God measures depth, not speed. 11. God's best work often comes through weakness, not strength. Lesson. Cowman's greatest influence flowed after his strength was gone. Application. If your strength has failed, don't assume God has. Weakness may be the doorway through which His power finally moves unhindered. 12. Productivity is not proof of faithfulness. Lesson. Activity did not equal impact. Application. If your worth is tied to how much you do, God may lovingly dismantle that idol. Faithfulness is obedience, whether visible or hidden. 13. The desert is not a detour, it is a design. Lesson. Streams only exist because deserts are real. Application. If you are in a dry season, stop asking, how do I escape this? Ask instead, what stream is God preparing to release through this? 14. God may remove your platform to amplify your voice. Lesson. Cowman was heard most loudly after becoming silent. Application. If doors have closed and influence has shrunk, do not panic. God sometimes lowers the volume of your life so He can increase the clarity of your message. 15. Legacy is often revealed after obedience is complete. Lesson. Cowman never saw the full reach of his suffering. Application. Live faithfully without demanding to see the outcome. Legacy belongs to God. Obedience belongs to you. Final application. Ask yourself today, not casually, but prayerfully, am I trusting God only when I am productive? Would I still believe He is good if He calls me into silence? Can I let Him work through me when He no longer works from me? The desert is not where God abandons His servants. It is where He presses olives and releases streams that outlive them. If you are currently in a desert, if you feel like your best years are behind you, or that your suffering has rendered you useless, look at the life of Charles Cowman. The Great Village Campaign was a noble work, but Streams in the Desert was a masterpiece. The first was built by Charles. The second was birthed by God through Charles's pain. The question for us today is not, how much can I do for God? The question is, will I trust Him when He calls me into the silence? Charles Cowman's life ended with a physical heart that stopped beating, but it started a spiritual pulse that hasn't stopped yet. May we have the courage to burn out for the right things, but more importantly, may we have the faith to sit still when the fire becomes a slow, refining heat. Because the desert is not where the story ends. It is where the stream begins.